Hello, listeners. Welcome to yet another episode of the Courage Talks. Today, I have a special guest, someone who's not based here in India, and yet she's achieved significant stuff both in her personal life and in her ultra running journey. Sonia Ahuja is based in Southern California. She's had a glittering career in corporate life, worked across different CXO roles, coming from a tech background, started in a very humble way in a remote part of Old Gurgaon, which I'm going to hear more about. But beauty is that she's conquered some ferociously scary runs like the Badwater Ultra and the UTMB. I'll let Sonia complete her introduction. Welcome, Sonia.
Thank you so much, Hital. I really appreciate this opportunity and look forward to spending some good time and talking more. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. So one of the interesting part of your introduction obviously was that you come a very long way. The word long has especially big meaning when you come from a remote part of the country. Tell us, what was childhood like? What was growing up like for you?
It was very different. Let's just say that. I grew up in, as I said, old part of Gurgaon.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a family where, it was a joint family. If you remember those days, this is my grandparents had left that part of Punjab, which fell into Pakistan, and they had to relocate themselves,
Okay,
right?
okay.
So,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
my generation saw the impact of that. So, where
Okay.
I lived in old part of Gurgaon, we had my grandfather, his three sons, three daughters, all living together, and then we had our grandfather's brother also with six kids, and we
Oh,
all lived in one house,
wow.
almost like I mean, it was a big house, but. I grew up, I was the eldest daughter of kind of this family. So it was very different. There were days I still remember I would not know if I would get dinner because there were so many family members to feed, and I don't think we
Hmm.
were very wealthy at that time. Honestly, we
Yeah,
were coming from like this whole partition. My family was still trying to get back to normal life.
yeah.
But I also think that what made, who you are, right? You learned the resilience part and how to deal with sort of these challenges and still be able to thrive. I kind of looking back, I thought that was really good that actually I had a little bit what I would describe
Yeah.
challenging childhood because
Yeah.
that really helped me.
No, I think that's, you touched upon a very sensitive part, because I moved to Gurgaon only in 2010, and for us, partition and all the events around the partition were just what we heard, what we read in the history book.
Yeah.
But after having moved there and met so many people have so many touching and really moving stories about what the partition did to them. Starting all over again. Being literally being in like the upper high class, to coming down to being nobody literally in a country which is now your own. I think that requires a lot of resilience, and it requires a lot of guts, I would say, to
Yeah.
be able to put up a bold face and go out and say, okay, I'm going to start all over again. And I think,
Especially when you're like my family were all farmers, right? In back
yeah,
back in old
yeah,
days in
true, true.
Punjab. You can't take your farms with you when you move. So
You
when
can't.
they had to
That's true.
leave what they would describe their investment or wealth,
True.
they couldn't
Yes.
take it. So that's why they all became then teachers because they said people cannot take these physical assets you can leave, but nobody can take your education from you, right? So
Oh, yeah.
that's kind
That's
of
true.
what resulted in everyone believing so highly on education.
That's true. So you touched on two important thing, right? Farming or farmland, which you can't take; education, which nobody can take away from you, right? So I
Exactly.
think it's very interesting, and making most of the opportunities that you get, right? Not brooding on what is left behind, and being extra conscious of what you still have and which you can make the most of. What's the first memory which you remember, or what's one memory of your childhood which has stayed with you? It could be some incident, it could be some toy, it could be something which someone told you, which kind of stayed with you till today. Anything which comes to your mind?
I think my biggest memory is walking for kilometers and kilometers to just buy milk, for example, right? So because we were in old Gurgaon, now
Yeah.
Gurgaon, what we have now there is
Now milk comes to your
so
house. You don't need
different.
to go anywhere.
Exactly. And then
Yeah.
you can have milk delivered now at home,
Oh, yeah.
right? We didn't had neither the money nor those resources.
Yeah.
So I just remember being from again farmer's family. Like my grandfather will either go on cycle or we will walk. So I'll go with them for everything, like any staple you had to buy. My mom used to work in Delhi as a school teacher, and we lived in Gurgaon. So she would get up at 3 a.m.
Oh,
and
man.
walk for kilometers to get to the railway station and then take a 5 a.m., train.
Seriously.
So, yeah, yeah. I mean, those were days I still think our generation couldn't do it. I mean, next generation can't even think these things,
Yeah.
right? But I'm lucky, and I consider myself lucky to have experienced that and to see what that life was, and
Okay.
that shaped
Now
me
I
to
know where all the ultra marathon genes have come from. I don't need to ask you that. Well, the podcast is all about courage, courage talks, and the inspiration behind this podcast is the book Against All Odds. That's my father's biography, which I wrote.
hmm
And for me, the source of inspiration was obviously, when I wrote my dad's story, there were so many acts of courage in his daily life that he experienced, and I thought that's a good idea to bring out courage from people's daily life. And I think the instances or examples that you shared are very much relevant from that perspective. Growing up, of course, you would have had role models, but today, if I ask you, who's your role model of courage?
Yeah, I think I have many. I draw inspiration from like people that I just observe on a daily basis. I mean, if I were to pinpoint one, I would say my parents, especially my mom. As I said, like those days now I look back, right? They had to be mom, they had to be daughter. She worked really hard. She was a teacher, but she had very high work ethic, what I describe now. Took care of all her school kids were like their children, right? So she would invite those kids back to our house sometimes, and they'll just stay with me and they'll study for the evening the entire time there in our house. That's how dedicated she was. And she always served in schools that were more in poor
Yes.
colonies, like where people couldn't afford either
Underprivileged.
education, yeah, and privilege. And she would make sure that they actually pass, even though it was really tough for some of those kids to focus on academics. But that was her entire mission. So I think the reason I see her as a role model is, she was one of those who took her job very seriously. And once she put her goal as, helping those kids, she would do whatever it takes kind of mindset to support. And I think to me that's the courage, when I say
Hmm.
normal people have, right, like, that's
Yeah.
what I look for and aspire for.
I think, parents do a lot in terms of demonstrating. And I think your mother did a fabulous job in just demonstrating what she's doing and let you take the learning out of it, right? Rather than eking out or speaking out. But anything which comes to your mind, anything which your mother or anyone told you something, like, for example, for me, my father always used to write, do not react. Everywhere it would be, I mean, he would
Yeah,
actually
that's a good
print a
one.
sticker saying, do not react. I would pick up a notepad on his table, it would have do not react mentioned on the top page. Anything which strikes to you as a kind of a slogan or a quote which stayed with you in terms of "Papa kaha karte the" or something like that?
Yeah. My dad has one, I would say, unique thing which I have taken from him in some cases. It was not a slogan, but he would say he would not care about society. Especially in India, which is so society based kind of culture.
Yeah,
People say, wo kya kahega, what will they think? So he never, his belief was, you do what you believe in, you do, like, be authentic. If I were to
yeah,
put words around that, and you don't change who you are based on what other people perceive you. So and I think that's what gave me the courage to make some decision that I would call were unpopular or untraditional
right.
throughout my life, and I still continue to do that. I will make those moves that people will say, wow, this is like not typical, or it takes a lot of courage. But I think it started from him growing as a daughter, a girl. Like, he didn't
Hmm.
care I was a girl. And gave me every opportunity that a son will get. So I think to me that definitely stands out.
Right. And of course, I'm sure you have had a checkered journey from old Gurgaon to all the way to California. Tell us which is your moment there where you felt the stacks were against you, right? I mean, there was very little chance for you. I mean, I'm referring to education and career. I'm not coming to ultra marathon right now. But, if you could describe, how you moved, what was the progression like, and where did you feel that, hey, this is looking tough, right? This is unlikely to happen types.
I think my biggest move was moving from India to US. That was my first job out of college. I did my master's in computer applications, very typical engineering kind of path,
Yeah.
right? Got into TCS. And then I don't know, this was might be because there was so much demand in US at that time. This was
Yeah.
1999. I My first assignment as a technology consultant was in United States. So I did not work in India at all.
Okay.
Interestingly, I
Wow.
basically moved here. I mean, I worked, but very minimal. I would say few
You must
months.
be one
Not
of the blue-eyed girls who didn't have to work in India and move straight
Yeah,
forward.
I did not work very hard as an engineer, and that's a whole different story, because I just realized after I became a software developer, that was not my thing. I could not focus on sitting
Yeah.
on at laptop and just all day desk job. So long story short, when I
Yeah.
moved to US, I remember, this feels so kind of embarrassing a little bit now, but I couldn't speak even proper English at that time, right?
Oh,
Because we all went to old Gurgaon school. I mean,
yeah.
English
Yeah.
was taught, but it was not
It
our
was a
native
foreign
language.
language, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. And there was no need for us to speak English at
Yeah.
the time. So when I moved here, and I obviously had to be very fluent, I didn't had the confidence to even talk. And the first place I landed here was New York City, which is kind of little extreme, right? When you think
Yes.
about US, like,
That's true.
you land in a large city and people are speaking so fast English, and I couldn't even respond. So at that point I thought I was such a, like, what made me think to come here all alone?
Yeah.
And I didn't had any friends here, no relatives, and made them, in India, single girl moving at those days, right,
Yeah.
1999, was not
Yeah.
very common either. So I had some doubts early on about whether this was the right decision. But honestly, as you adapt, very quickly I started to just learn English and, practice. And you just have to say one day at a time and just
Yeah.
deal with the challenge you're faced, solve it, overcome it, and life would be okay. And that's how it went.
Yeah. Yeah. Like in Hindi, there's a saying, right? Majburi ka naam Mahatma Gandhi. When you're put in that situation and when you don't have a choice, right? I mean, you obviously didn't have a choice.
Exactly.
Okay, let me take the ticket back to India because I couldn't speak English in the
Exactly.
US.
Yeah, exactly.
That's true. That's true. So you started your career in the US. I'm sure you made multiple progresses. You would have had various junctures where you had to take important decisions, which would have involved a lot of courage. Any particular incident which strikes you from your professional journey perspective, where you had to take tough decisions, or people were not cooperating with you, you had to get work done from your team. Any instance that strikes your mind?
Yeah, two maybe. The personal one was
Sure.
me leaving technology career and going back to business school and
Okay.
getting my MBA here was a tough one,
The
because I was
opportunity
doing
cost.
really well with
Yeah.
TCS, obviously. Engineering pays not bad. And it was again very, in the middle of this life, I say, okay, now I'm going full-time business school based on the savings. So that was, to me, was a real tough decision, but I'm so glad looking back I made. From a job perspective, I had always been a change and transformation leader. So typically financial services companies, when they hire me to introduce changes and transform and scale. As part of that, you end up making a lot of people decisions, right? So to me, the tough ones have been where you had these popular, very well connected people, but just were not performing well. And now when I evaluate, that's typically what I would do in 100 days. I will evaluate how strong the team is and make those decisions. This is one thing I learned from my mentor. Don't wait too long to make those tough decisions, right? If there is a smoke, there is a fire. So I will dig deep into like what issues are and what contributing to those issues. And if there are people associated with that, I would terminate those people early on or train them depending on where they fell, obviously. So I would say that has been early on, that was a challenge. Now I feel like it's part of my playbook, right?
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
as much fear. But when you're new and you're, new CXO, like my first role as CXO, and you had to make those decisions, it was nerve-wracking because these were very well-connected people. And then everyone else looked up to you as she comes and, now her friends are gone. And, so then the people who are left even are kind of looking at you as, they're afraid of you. So I had to learn how to really foster the environment where people can trust me despite some of these tough changes that I was making.
Yeah, I know that point that you mentioned about, giving up a good steady career, taking the break, going to B school, and of the opportunity cost, and then you start feeling that, hey,
Yeah,
what if I don't get back on the track and
exactly.
make the journey upwards all over again. Changing tracks, how did ultra marathon happen? How did running happen? What do you recollect the first tough memory as far as running is concerned?
Yeah, to me, running started actually very much in conjunction with what I'm saying. Like the corporate life to me had such influence on who I was in terms of like I was feeling stressed at times, right? My role was very challenging. So I would take that stress quite a bit at home. And I felt
Hmm.
that was affecting my health. So
Okay.
my initial running started as just a way to manage the stress. I would get out just to clear my brain and just get some fresh air. And then I saw when I would come back, I would just feel so fresh. And I mean, I almost would like forget about the issues, or I would have solved some business issues because could think much more clearly. So when I started noticing that correlation, that's when I became a big fan of running. But there were first few years I was just running 3 to 5 miles, just normal, and then for me, what I started to observe was I was this very curious person about kind of not only what you could do at work or business, but also like physically what you're capable of. So I like to out of your comfort zone. So I started pushing more miles or going, faster paces. But mostly I like going longer runs. So then I started doing marathons. And then I noticed that after marathons, I would next day feel so fresh and just willing to just go and another 20 miles or something like long run, which was not very usual again for early on
Right.
marathon people. And that's gave me just this idea of maybe there's a longer distance I need to do to feel. I really wanted to feel the pain and I wasn't getting it from 26
I think the
miles.
non-runners are not going to like what they're hearing, right? So you
Yes, like
ran a marathon and you're feeling fresh.
yeah, yeah. I would look upon some of my friends, and they would be marathon after sleeping the whole day, or they're like, "Oh, it hurts," and it's like I'm
Yeah.
sore. I'm like, I actually feel okay. So there's something wrong with me. Like I need to maybe run
Yeah.
more to
Did
get
you
that.
actually go for a checkup? Are you sure there's nothing wrong?
Started as I just wanted that feeling of soreness and pain, and it was not. For some reason, I wasn't getting it from marathons.
No, no, I totally get you. I mean, and that's actually a very good analysis of what you made, right? I mean, you realize you had excess capacity, which is going unutilized, right? Might as well put it to good use, right? I mean, I remember reading this book, which obviously had David Goggins as the key
Oh
actor,
yeah.
Life with the Navy SEAL, Living with a SEAL.
Oh no, I had read that book.
So
Yes.
the author is calls David Goggins to stay with him for 30 days and says,
Yeah.
get me into physical activity like you, right? Make me a mini David Goggins or whatever. And he's got this crazy schedule and all. And one day it's like freakingly cold, and he comes back from work, and David says, "Let's go for a run." Somehow he manages like a 15 miler, comes home and like, "I have done what he asked me to do. Now let me just go in, take shower, and have dinner." And he says, "Let's do 50 push-ups." The guy looks at him like, "What? What do you mean?" Don't let the adrenaline go waste. And that stuck with me, right? I think you got it right. You said, why let the adrenaline go waste? I mean, if you've got that high of finishing the marathon and you've got capacity for more, might as well stretch that, right?
Yeah.
But to stretch beyond a marathon from a 42 to a 50K or a 100K is understandable. But what made you sign up for the Badwater Ultra? And for the listeners, why don't you just describe how scary and how difficult that run is?
Sure, yeah. For those who don't know, Badwater is considered the toughest race on the foot in the world, primarily because of a few things. One, it's one of the hottest race. The typical temperatures in Fahrenheit, I would say, is 135. What would be that in Celsius? Pretty extreme weather, so let's
Yeah,
just say
50
that,
plus.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's dry heat, so it's in desert. It is a very different heat, like you can feel the burn on your skin, right? And secondly, it goes from the lowest point in the United States, which is Death Valley Basin, to the highest point in contingent 48 states, Mount Whitney Portal. So the elevation gain is gradual in the beginning, but there are some steep hills. But also it's all on asphalt, unlike many other races like UTMB, which are on trails. Trails can be easy on your joints, but typically they say if it's asphalt, it can be really hard on your joints to run that long. So all that combination makes this race very unique, and there's no aid station, so it's not aided race, which adds another element of challenge in terms of planning. You have to plan your own sort of support team and structure to continue this race. What made me sign up was, when I learned about this race, which is funny because when I ran this race a year ago, I didn't even know there was a race like that. Someone sent me a video of this guy. Now I know him, Bob Becker, who was crawling to the finish. And, people said, this reminds us of you because you have this kind of resilience. So that's how I saw this video. I'm like, where is he running? And then someone says, oh, you don't know, this is Badwater. Like, I have no idea what bad. So I Googled Badwater, right? And then I go to the Wikipedia page and I started reading about it. I just felt there was so much like metaphor similarities between Badwater race and life. So to me, that was a very attractive part. So I
Hmm.
started to envision what that would be, to go from lowest point to highest, to continue, without any support, right? So I fell in love with the idea of that challenge. But really, the trigger point me was when I went on the website, I looked up, so they have all the runners who have till date ran this race, right? Because there's only 100 runners that get invited to run every year.
Yeah.
It's a very tough process to get in. And there was no Indian woman. There were some Indian males I saw, very few, not quite a bit.
Yeah.
But then I started to say, okay, is there any woman? Just curious. I always look up to women, right, who are strong. And I didn't find one. That was the day when I said, okay, this is not almost fair, right? I need to put the name of an Indian woman there. So if nobody else is there, maybe I can be. So yeah,
Maybe you're
that is the
going to
day
be
I
there.
reached out to the race director, said I really want to run it. And I still remember him saying, you're not ready for that. There's no way. Like, this is a very tough race. This is not for people who just decide to run
Yeah.
suddenly. And I got so obsessed with the race that I didn't want to take another few years to sort of go through a lot of that multiple races.
R&D.
So I tried to short circuit and still made it to Badwater somehow.
So how many hours did it take you?
It took me around 25 hours, north of 25.
And what's the record like?
So when I ran this, the woman record was 24 around hours. I went into the race knowing that 24 plus, it was give and take maybe 24 and a half, something like that. So my plan was to, this is my secret, I have not shared this with many people, but my plan was to actually go and break the course record. That, at least that was my plan, stretch goal, I should say, right? It
Yeah.
was not
Yeah.
my main goal, but I knew that if everything works out perfectly, which hardly happens in ultra, by the way, right?
Of
So
course.
but it was
In
it
none,
was
no
behind the
race it
scene,
works out so
behind my
perfectly.
head. I had put that if everything goes well, I am capable of doing that. But
Yeah.
I was prepared that challenges will come and I'll have to respond to them. But yeah, so I was very focused on kind of the numbers in terms of like just wanting. And the reason behind wasn't to win the race or get this limelight. Really, to me, the why, they say you have to have a strong why. My why was
Yeah.
making sure that when an Indian woman is running and the name is on the roster, people can
Yeah.
look up to it and say, okay, Indian women are strong, right? So
Yeah.
so that was really, for me, is representing our own community in that race.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think you made the country really proud by doing what you did. Courage is a lot about vulnerability, letting your emotions roll. Any instance in your running journey where you literally like were shedding tears, you couldn't hold back your emotion?
I mean, it was actually Badwater was one of the moments. Again, not many people know that because thankfully I did finish the race. But I was, so just to share with you a little bit
Sure.
experience of the race.
Yeah.
I ran the first, so I divide 135 miles into 5 marathons, right? So 5 back to back. My first 4 marathons were extremely well. Like I was ahead of my schedule. I was on track to break the course record and I was feeling strong. I was not in pain. Surprisingly, I didn't feel any pains, almost like a perfect day up till the fourth marathon. But as they
Okay.
say, in ultra, you don't finish until you finish, right? You just don't
Yes.
know when
True.
issues will pop up. My
Yeah.
issue popped up when I was just 13 miles away from the finish line. So it was half marathon left. It was a steep now hill. And I don't know what happened, but suddenly my body started to bend in one direction. It might be lack of electrolytes or some
Yeah.
imbalance that caused
Yeah.
it. But it was very difficult to troubleshoot it because none of us, my crew or I, had ever faced this challenge before. So not only that, when I started, I still felt that 13 miles I could finish even though my body was not completely like straight. Like I
Yeah.
started still running very fast. I remember one split like running sub 8 or pretty fast for that mile, and then suddenly I fell down. So I get
Oh.
up and I start to run again and I again fell down. So then, after a few of these, I realized that something has happened. So basically, to summarize, I could not even stand
Oh man.
after that. So my body just completely kind of locked. So the moment I would try to stand straight, I would take a fall. So then the last 13 miles, so basically my crew evaluated, at that point there was no doctors, right? Again, as I said, there are no aid station in this race,
Yeah.
there's no support. You and your crew, my crew observed it. We had this discussion, right? They felt that I this race was over for me and we needed to call emergency or kind of,
Oh man.
take care for to me to be healthy, like just pull me out of the race.
Yeah.
I declined to do that. That was the time when it was emotionally like I couldn't
Yeah.
believe how close I was to, something like you have dreamt forever, right?
Yeah.
And I was actually executing very well. And
Yeah.
now suddenly, we didn't even know what happened. It's not like it was very obvious. But I was not willing to give up. My crew was in tears. I was pretty sort of upset, but I had to put that feeling aside and say, all you can do is, Sonia, what you can control, right? I couldn't control
Yeah.
what was happening. I had to kind of regroup myself and say one foot at a time. That's when, like, I remember everyone saying, just focus on the next step and you'll make it. So, and that's what I did. Believe me or not, I crawled mostly in that 13 miles.
Oh man.
Yeah,
Really?
I could have, in a good day, I was planning to do that 13 miles in some hours, 2:30. But I took more than 5 hours. So that's where I was out of my course record goal. But I
Oh.
had to respond. But interestingly, now I think back, it's like I still finished that. It's like I can't even believe that I finished that race
Yeah.
when I couldn't even stand. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, a lot of learnings there and a lot of emotionals. But when I
Yeah.
finished, I was happy, obviously.
Wow. I'm sure. I'm sure that would have been a amazingly emotional moment, despite the fact that you went through all that.
What surprised me was I was still the second woman and fourth overall. So like, but that's a good. That's where I think about life similarly. It's
Yeah.
like you think your race was over, and I would have guessed that there are so many people would have passed me that time. Surprisingly, nobody passed me in that 13 miles. So I
Wow.
still maintain my I was running second position for a
So they were
last
what, 96 still behind you?
yeah, they were there. I have put so much gap. Like I didn't
Yeah.
realize that until I then analyzed the results. I'm like, wow, I put so much gap that in those
Hmm.
5 hours people didn't pass me. So that was
Yeah.
in a good day that could have been a different result. But I was
Yeah.
happy to be still put
Wow.
again India map and be the second woman overall and
Fabulous.
fourth overall.
Fabulous. Fabulous. I'm sure that picture is going to stay with you for a very long time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think courage involves a lot of risk as well. I know your Badwater decision, you might call it a big risk, but any particular decision in your life, running, not running, where you think you took a lot of risk, you bet on yourself when others were not asking you to or not expecting you to. Anything which comes to your mind?
I would say most of my decision regarding career are like that, not
Yeah.
just one. I am right now in the middle of one. I am really living comfortable life in California.
Yeah.
As you know, perfect place for outdoor running.
Yeah.
And my job is really good. I'm a president and manage an insurance services division. So everything is great. And when everything looks so great and comfortable, I always think that it can be like life can be so comfortable, right? I gotta take some challenge. So I
Yeah.
just took a new role, which I haven't even announced publicly yet. But this role requires me to be in Nashville, and it's an insurance company that's growing. And so I would say this is an example of a move that probably not the more popular,
Yeah.
with my family, but I felt I needed a big challenge to
Yeah.
continue to grow, and so that's where I'm going.
Yeah, a lot of things which we do in corporate life, our family just doesn't understand. I'm sure this is one of them. Another interesting learning for us in life is through failures. Any failure that you recollect which stays with you from a learning perspective?
Wow, yeah, that's a good one.
I know you avoided one in Badwater.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
avoided a big one.
There are many examples now after Badwater of failures,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Races. But I would say the one that comes to me is more from a corporate life. Although I made some mistakes in ultra running too. But in corporate life, I think there was one point where I things got really tough, right? From this was a private equity owned company expecting a lot of results from me. And I was the main person accountable for the P&L and delivering those shareholders' returns. And I remember one point in my career where when things became so tough that I quit. And I tried convincing myself this was a toxic environment. This is not the kind of culture I needed, right? But after I quit and I kind of went what I would describe, try to find an easier route, that 6 months later or even month later, I realized that that was not what I should have done,
Mhm.
because ultimately I do thrive under pressure and challenges, and that's what makes who I am. But I did learn from that don't rush to quit. And that applies to ultra running too. I have not had a
Yeah.
DNF, thankfully, so far, because I remember that experience. I remember that if I do quit too quick, I would
Yeah.
always have this feeling. So the feeling I had to live for the rest of the year
Yeah.
of quitting was way
Yeah.
more difficult than the challenges themselves, right?
No doubt about that.
and
Yeah.
and not only career wise, as I said, in life I would never forget that, because I don't want to have that feeling ever again. I would
Yeah.
rather fail and
Yeah.
take on the challenge than to call it a quit too quick.
That's true. That's true. So, earlier you mentioned about how your mother was a role model for you from a courage perspective. But, as you grew up, obviously you got exposed to the corporate world, you're exposed to the running community. Would you want to call out someone from the corporate world and someone from the running community whom you look up to, whom you look up as your inspiration, or someone whose example you would want to ape yourself, or you already aped?
Yeah, my role models have been very simple people in life. I wish I could give a big name that stands out, but I look up to like day-to-day people and kind of learn from them.
Mm-hmm.
I would say on a professional front, my first boss is the person comes to my mind. Again, I'm new from US, I mean from India, come here, right? She was
Yeah.
so supportive, and I never used to speak up in the beginning because culturally we, especially girls, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're not supposed to argue or you're not supposed to say no, right? But in US, this was, as a change leader, you had to challenge the status quo, and that wasn't easy for me. So she would always tell me after the meeting, is like, because I'll go to her with some ideas after that, and she's like, "Why didn't you speak up in the meeting?" It's like, I because I'm the most junior person there, and she's like, "So what?" Like, so that
Yeah.
part to me always stood out, is and she became kind of my mentor. So I would say
Yeah.
that I look up to her still date quite a bit. On the ultra running side, I would say Courtney Walter is one person I have just admired the most. She just
Mm-hmm.
won another race yesterday, actually. But what I like about her is her casual attitude, and how she has said this pain cave, right? This concept of embrace the pain. And so I can relate to her in a lot of ways. So yeah, I consider her as my role model from ultra running
Very
standpoint.
interesting. For me, the source of inspiration has been books. Any
Yeah.
book or books which you would want to call out as something which stays with you from something which inspired you, something which stays with you for the day?
You talk about David Goggins. I mean, I've read many of his books. The one, I forget the name now.
Can't hurt, can't hurt me.
Yes, I would say that definitely. I mean, I listen to Audible now these days because when you
Yes.
go for long runs, you have so much time to kill.
Oh yeah.
So I listen to his book. So yeah, I would say that. And then another one is Into the Thin Air. I don't know if you have read
Into thin
that.
air. Into thin air. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also very intrigued by the mountains, and
Oh,
someday I would like to get more into Himalayas and hopefully climb some of those peaks. But I'm visualizing these days that part. But that book was so, I still remember parts of that book, and it always gives you those goosebumps. So
oh
I would
yeah.
say
True.
that,
True.
yeah,
True. Yeah, I think there's a movie on that as well. So I think
yeah.
it stays with you, and from experience perspective, from a relatability perspective. Maybe you've taken the wind away from the next question, but corporate life, ultra running. If you're supposed to get into a yet another third career, what would that be?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that is something. A lot of people try telling me even now I should get into triathlon, and I can't see that myself. But I would say if one thing that stands out is mountains. Yes.
Yeah.
I would like to get into more climbing.
Hmm.
Like I did Mount Everest Base Camp and Peak Labuche once, a few years. Most recently, I went to Ecuador and climbed Chimborazo, which is also considered one of the highest mountain measured from the
Okay.
sea level. Again, I like the similarities between mountaineering and life. So
Yes.
yeah, I would love to. I would love to climb more mountains.
And it's true. I mean, obviously road running and mountaineering you can't compare, but once you get on a trail and it's a
Yeah,
gradual climb where it's not pace, it's sheer endurance, then you can obviously take that endurance from trail to a mountain and replicate
true.
that. And of course, the other thing is, of course, carry a lot of stuff with you, lighter air as you go up on the altitude. How do you adjust to thin air and lack of oxygen? I think that brings out the element as well. But yeah, you're right. I mean, whatever I've seen, I've done the base camp as well. And whatever I've seen, I can definitely relate the two sports.
Yeah.
And yes, I think Ladakh should definitely be your next destination, whether it's running or it's trekking for that matter as well.
Yeah, now you have motivated me for Ladakh,
Yeah.
so that
That,
definitely I would love to
yeah,
one
that
day.
does make sense. So this is where we are coming to the interesting point. Family, anything which you'd like to share, anything which has been what your family has inspired you, anything which you'd like to share.
Sure, yeah. I mean, one is on my parents because they gave me this sort of the values of being
Yeah,
fearless and mantra of what I would call nothing is impossible, right? You define your goal and you go for it and don't worry about like what people think. So I think to me that they are a big part of who I am. And also my husband and my daughter, I have a 17-year-old. She is absolutely fearless. Like I see her
wow,
sometimes and see, wow, I need to learn from her.
yeah,
She's probably my role model right now,
wow,
at
that's
this
that's a
age.
huge compliment
Yeah.
for her.
Yeah, I mean, she wants to go into politics and like she watches like political podcasts every morning and she's aspiring to be in White House. Like, it's like where does
Please
this
ask
come
her to grow
from? Like,
fast. You badly need some good politicians.
yeah, that's what she said. She's like, I think we need some better, people out there. So
Yeah,
why can't I be there? So I don't know what she will become. That time will tell. But to have that courage and put an aspiration like that, I
yeah,
think to me that is even very untraditional, and I admire her for that. And then my husband has been very supportive. Like I would say, just like my parents, he always believed kind of in this equality, right? In our home,
yeah.
we are very different individuals, very different, but we respect those differences and sort of not only respect but support each other. So I would say I couldn't be where I am without his support.
Wow, fabulous, fabulous. The last part is where I pass on the mic to you. What's the question you have for me?
Well, I would love to hear what is your most difficult challenge has been, whether in terms of ultra running or just life in general, and how did you deal with that?
So I think it's a no-brainer. So my Ironman journey, which I did in 22, had a bit of a masala in it. So unlike the typical Ironman training, I had compressed my training just to 2 months. So within
Wow.
these 2 months, I had done about 39 kilometers of swimming, all in the pool. I didn't go into the open water at all. I had done 850 kilometers of cycling and 230 kilometers of running. And my last practice bike ride was a 100K ride, and I had completed 96 out of the city. I'd gone out of the city in Coimbatore, and it was just
Wow.
4 kilometers left. I had come into the city, and I was approaching a traffic signal, which was red at that time. And I thought by the time I read the signal, it would turn green. And of course, I was wearing cleats. So I didn't bother to disengage the cleats because I knew I would cross the signal. But I read the signal was still red. I had to stop, and it was a sudden stop. I couldn't disengage my legs, and I fell on the left, and I had to take support with my left wrist. It was paining a little bit. I somehow managed to get up and take the bike to the shop nearby because it was the last ride. So I had to just give the bike to get it packed up for me to fly. And I came home, took shower, had lunch, and I sat down for my PhD class. The entire 3 hours of the class, the wrist was still paining. I was like, something is wrong here. So while the class was on, I messaged my physio and I messaged my ortho, and I told them, look, this is what had happened. What should I do?
Yeah.
The ortho said, get an X-ray done. The physio said, why don't you just put some ice pack and let it cool down? If it's something minor, in a couple of hours, you'll know. The class ended at around 6 o'clock. It was still hurting me. I said, let me just go and get an X-ray done. And I go to the doctor, and he gives me the bad news that, hey, there's a
Oh,
wrist fracture here.
oh my
And I
God.
said, what happens now? He said, you're going to have a cast for the next 6 weeks. I said, 6 weeks? In 2 weeks, I'm doing an Ironman. There is no way I'm going to let a cast be on my hand. Fortunately, the ortho himself was a cyclist. So he could understand, what kind of crazy patient
Yeah.
he's got. he didn't even try to unconvince me. He was like, okay, I need to find a solution which will work for both of us. मैं भी अपना काम कर लूँ, ये भी अपना काम
That
कर
is
ले. So he said,
phenomenal. Yeah.
yeah. So he said, when are you traveling? I said, a week from now. So he said, come back to me on the last day. I'm going to put a cast on you. Come back to me on the last day. I'll take out the cast and I'll give you a splint. You go with the splint. I'll leave it to you. Don't tell anyone that I've authorized this. It's your decision. You need to bear with it. So I fly down. I reach there the day of the Ironman. The previous day, I did a bit of bike ride, and
So was
obviously,
this your first Ironman?
first and only Ironman. I've done only one of
Oh
them so far.
wow, that is
Yeah. So
courageous to do
yeah.
that.
So the previous day, I tried out the bike ride, and obviously, it was spinning a little bit. My plan was that I'm going to put the splint. I'm going to keep a crepe bandage as well. I said, let me just doubly pack it up and whatever. The swim obviously got impacted. I mean, I couldn't push very hard with this hand as much as I would have wanted to. So instead of 140, I finished my swim in 203. But the real test was the bike ride. And, I narrowly was missing out on the cutoff. I jumped on the bike. I said, we'll put the bandage in later on. I got on the bike and just started cycling. 5 kilometers into it, I had not put the splint and I had not put the crepe bandage. I was like, if I can do without it, why the hell should I,
Yeah.
bother myself? Just let me do it. I did the entire 180K bike ride with fractured wrist, got down, finished the bike ride, got on the run. So overall, I finished against my estimate of about 16 and a half. I finished the entire Ironman in 15 hours. You might ask me what motivated me. So Ironman as a competition started in 1978. On the planet, there would be give and take 4 to 5 million people who would have done the Ironman in some way or the other. The number of people who done with a fractured wrist, it's only me. So that memory stays with me. I mean, I was like, wow, I mean, this is another opportunity for me, not just to do an Ironman, to do an Ironman with a fractured wrist. I said, I got a great story for my social media post the next day.
You should be in the Guinness Book of World Records.
I'll have to check that. With all the kind of fancy outfit people are running marathons and getting into Guinness Book, I'm sure a fractured wrist should be a great case to try and apply for that.
We should be in that category if it doesn't exist.
Yeah. No, I think it's a memory which stays with me, and I'm like jumping to get a second and a third Ironman done. Probably should happen next year so that I can, have more stories to tell.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That tells me when you think you can do things, that's what one thing Courtney says, which resonates with me.
Yeah.
When you think you can't go any further or you have achieved just try it and you will be surprised what your body can, do.
That's
right? It's like the mind comes first and the body just follows.
Totally. I'm a totally believer that any physical activity is more mental than physical.
Yeah.
Physical is more about a hurdle. Like I had a hurdle.
Yeah.
If you have an hurdle, then yes, it can get more challenging. It can get more difficult. And sometimes actually it's impractical. Of course, David Goggins doesn't believe that. But for the rest of the human community, I think there are a lot of impractical things. And for me, the role model, of course, you ask me, is this lady called Anupama Singh, double amputee. She's done all the 7 peaks in the world. What more do you need?
Yeah. I actually follow her too. Right.
Yeah. So
very inspirational.
Yeah. No, but great, Sonia. It was a pleasure talking to you. Really proud of you. Someone who's proved your detractors wrong by, going beyond limits, both in your personal life, professional life, and as an ultra marathoner. Thank you very much for this.
Yeah, thank you so much for this time. And it was really great speaking with you.
Awesome. Great. Thank you.